So we've got that loading. Awesome. Just a reminder, for everybody, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself until we get to kind of the Q&A portion, which we'll make sure to leave plenty of time for that. You never know what those background noises are and what Zoom is going to decide to pick up and all of a sudden showcase and re-feature. So just a quick, I guess, kind of note, for you, Sergey, we have quite a big, I guess, kind of wide swath, or if we're throwing out some tech terms, array of people here in the audience. We've got, some students who have graduated the program. We've got some alumni who are actually working as professional developers. And we have others who are just actually thinking, is this something that I want to do? And if LinkedIn and the posts that we put out in that Operate channel work, then we've got some tech professionals here as well. But definitely appreciate you taking the time and kind of going through a little bit of an update of what the tech market looks like. And we'll dive into so much more of that. But obviously want to kind of kick things off and give you an opportunity to fill in the blanks of what our description that we had put on the event may have left out, because you've got a few degrees. You've got the bachelor's from UC San Diego, you've got the University of Liverpool, and if I noted correctly, you're currently attending and finishing up the Harvard extension. Maybe that's just an older LinkedIn, but I mean, there's quite a few things going there. And then you have a ton of professional experience. So it is clear that you love tech. So what did I miss, and what can we kind of, I guess, fill in for everybody in the audience before we get going?
So there's a couple of things to note about my career. I started out, I didn't really even, at a certain point, I didn't know that there is a career in software engineering. I thought that software engineering is just what electrical engineers and mechanical engineers do when they want their equipment to function, right? So I didn't really know that there was such a thing. And I got to find out that there is such a thing by working on I started working in hydraulics. That was my earliest experience. So I was working on the laboratory pump and I designed the whole pump, and I designed all the electronics. I actually even wrote a programming language for it. And I had an engineer working with me. He was designing a separate programming language to run various experiments on my pump. And he was, at the time, he was programming in C and some embedded assembly. And I asked him, what did he do? Did he study somewhere? And he said, yeah, he studied at Berkeley. And we got to talking. I really didn't realize that there was a separate discipline. And what really clinched it for me, because I come to find out he makes more money than I do writing software for my pump. And I asked him, what's going to happen if his software has a bug and it makes my pump malfunction and it blows up and kills somebody? He's like, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen, but likely you will go to jail. I'm like, okay, I think that's quite interesting. You write software for my pump, and it's your fault, and I get to go to jail. By the way, do you need a license to write software? He's like, nope, nobody needs to ever license me. I'm like, well, that's strange. I need to be licensed to be an electrical engineer. So I'm like, I think I'm in the wrong profession. I need to go do something else. So I went to UCSD, grew up as in my career as a typical software engineer, senior engineer, and then architect, and the director, and the VP of this, and the CTO of that. But at a certain point, I knew that I wanted to. I got interested so much in business and figuring out how do I channel my technical expertise into being a business owner. So at a certain point, I decided to do a startup, and I've been in building startups ever since. So I kind of channeled my pursuits and my software engineering pursuits into a business endeavors.
So over the course of that time, of course, you've done quite a bit of, hiring, and you haven't stepped completely away from, the startup world, because you're still involved with am I saying Certemy correctly?
That's right.
And so you're still, running Certemy. But one of the reasons, that we had connected and kind of discussed is that you do a lot of mentorship, and, that's mentorship with both, people who are coming out of a boot camp. I thought it was really, really cool that, Ivan Naragosha, one of our alumni, is working with DCR and closely with Beckham and the team there, and you advise them. And so you have experience with boot camp graduates. You've got the CS degrees and the PhDs yourself, and you're mentoring PhDs too. So you really have insight into just about any way somebody is getting into technology and kind of starting out their career. As somebody who's been doing this for a while, as somebody who is also, I think it's safe for us to say, has been pretty successful, why do you choose to give, time back like this? Why not sit on a beach? I guess we are right near beaches, but
I'm sitting near the beach, and that's good enough. So it's a really good question. People ask me, why do I do this? And I do this a lot in many different places. So I mentor founders one-on-one, and I'm an anchor mentor for Google. I mentor with Google a couple of times a year, and a couple of other incubators and accelerators. And the reason I do this was because I started my first startup when I already had a PhD in business. So I thought, I can absolutely do it. And I can absolutely do a startup. And I started my first startup, and despite my best efforts, it was successful. We raised a lot of money, and then I made every possible mistake under the sun. And I thought I was exceptionally stupid. I thought that by chance I would miss one thing, doing things wrong, but I didn't. I hit every one of those bad points, which is not focusing my product on a particular customer, going far and wide, merging with other companies, buying companies, just very, very bad things. So I at a certain point, I figured out that startups is not just the same as software engineering. It is not an expert field. It is an experiential field. So in other words, it's not enough to know. You need to have experience, right? So it's the knowledge versus wisdom. And that's, I basically said, well, if somebody set me down for an hour and just explained all the things not to do, I would have avoided a lot of mistakes. Right, so I started doing a lot of the mentoring specifically for that reason. I wanted for people to avoid those mistakes that I made early in my career. Now, again, there's an argument to be made. If I didn't make them, would I make other mistakes, and what exactly would have happened? So that's one thing. Number two, I very quickly noticed similarity between new graduates, either from boot camps or PhDs, or anybody else who gets into software engineering. When you graduate from a 4-year university at any level, PhD, bachelor's, master's, you really come out as a computer scientist, not a software engineer, right? You're going to be the best computer scientist at the time you graduate, and the worst software engineer, right? And then over time, it completely shifts. You forget all your comp sci stuff, but you start to remember how to put projects together. And this is a lot more than simply knowing how to write code, right? It's working within the team. It's talking to the business people and defining a lot of intangibles that get into more than just simply writing code. So I noticed that that's one of the similarities that combines new graduates, right? So they're all the same in a sense that they're not yet software engineers. And software engineers, it's impossible. It's like learning how to swim. You just can't do it via Zoom. You just can't get that done, right? You need to actually do it in the pool.
I've been trying to tell my sister that she's taking a virtual surfing class right now for her freshman year in college. And Yeah, it's probably not the same. So let's circle back, I guess, and just, I guess we'll get back to that time traveling that we discussed at the beginning, and let's circle back to January, early February of 2020, which some people may remember was pre-COVID. What was tech like then? What was going on? And I think, we had crossed paths in the Operate studio. Obviously, in-person events were happening at the time. What was going on, in the space and in your world?
What was going on? Well, we're in the middle of the largest tech bubble that we saw since the crash in 2008. We had a lot of new startups. We had a lot of hiring. We had quite a few open positions across the board. Just the need was universal. There were just record of new startups starting. There's a lot of projects going on. A lot of VC money would go into a lot of companies would go public. Other companies would get acquired. So it was a tremendous ferment going on in the field. So that was the time when we hit the pandemic.
Yes, I think we can all remember, of course, the growth of WeWork, the growth of Uber, all of these companies that really hadn't shown any profitability yet. Yet at the same time, VCs were knocking on their door, and of course you got Massa and the SoftBank team throwing money and adding a zero to every check that they could have. And so what is happening today? And this, I think is going to be interesting for a lot of our audience, as well as people who are looking to get into tech. And there's no question about it. Tech has really cemented itself, as a strong industry and a fairly defensible industry during the, great lockdown, as Microsoft referred to it. So what has changed in technology in that time?
What has changed instead of universal need and demand for tech personnel, and so for developers and testers and product managers and pretty much everybody who's involved in making the software as a product, we saw some demand skyrocket in one particular set of industries. So, for instance, e-commerce became a highly impacted area. E-commerce, ERP, anything that has to do with video communication, Zoom and everybody else. It was remote learning. So all of these areas saw tremendous growth. Other areas which are related to which were related for things that are done in person, anything that had to do with travel, anything that had to do with hospitality, anything that has to do with restaurant industry, all that suffered because, again, we had a lot more people in a sedentary state as opposed to our normal conditions. So a lot of the startups in those areas, and companies, they either needed to pivot or they needed to basically cut their spending and just basically make ends meet by just reducing staff. So you didn't see during the normal recession, you see the market shrink by 20%. So in other words, you see the companies and they just fold, and that's pretty aggressive. As recessions go, tech industry tends to be the one that's affected the most upfront, but then it grows much quicker and rebounds much quicker after the recession. So this wasn't a normal recession. This was basically a couple of industries being hit severely, but other industries. And so you saw a lot of the repositioning. So you saw a lot of people going from one startup to another or from one company to another. So you didn't see contraction in the field itself. So there was, I didn't look at the numbers specifically, but I'm going to venture a guess that we didn't see anybody lose the job and not find a job.
Yeah, I think I had followed along. I believe it was the fall when Tech in Motion and Motion Recruitment Partners had put out a statistic about kind of changes in tech hiring. And while I think we're all aware of the jump that happened in unemployment across the U.S., I think the change in tech had been about less than 1%, difference. And from kind of more of a local standpoint, I know one of the kind of companies that Carrie and the operate team and Carrie had been really excited about was the Restaurant 365. And of course, if your business is back end support and systems for restaurants, things are going to get hit a little bit. But
Right.
I do agree that the war for talent in tech has not slowed down at any point. And as somebody who's built businesses, and while you currently reside in Orange County, you do have fairly dispersed teams. So when COVID hit, had that affected any of your teams or startups hiring, or had you guys been in a pretty good place to handle virtual interviewing, virtual onboarding? Because I know for a lot of in-person companies, that was one of the biggest challenges. Even though they knew that they were still going to grow and be in business, they just had to figure out how to bring people on.
Yeah, I think really the logistics of hiring, figuring it out, because by nature, people, regardless of where they are and what they do, people are not very self-organized, right? So there needs to be you need to reposition yourself for working remotely. Now again, I've been doing this for so long, and I had teams distributed for so long that I really didn't notice the difference, right? So I had work habits and I had the muscle memory to actually do what I do without skipping a bit. I keep going, and that wasn't much of an issue. Now, where we and others saw ahead is so much of the software engineering relies on learning by osmosis, learning from others. And being in the same office is basically absorbing some of that senior knowledge. And it's not a senior knowledge of code. It's the senior knowledge of how exactly formulate requirements, how exactly to collaborate with the business. So when you just coming on board, that's one of the most difficult things, is to one, you're just learning how to be a software developer, and two, you're trying to get into the business. So you're trying to learn the business, and you're also trying to learn your craft. That's where I saw some of the difficulty, right? So it's just in general, when something is new to you, you're not sure where to start, and so there's just some pressure. But otherwise, it's for people who have been doing this for some time, that's been just, well, okay, well, now I just don't need to get up and take a shower in the morning. Well, hopefully you do, but you don't need to drive, right? You don't need to drive, and you don't need to sit next to somebody. Your work habits pretty much haven't changed. But if you're just starting out, that was a bit of, you needed to be, in the word, deliberate. You needed to structure your day and to be deliberate.
Yeah, I agree. The intentionality of what you're doing, and then also taking the time to take a step back and say, okay, well, did that go well, or what do I need to change?
That's right.
Conscientiousness is really, really important nowadays. So, we've kind of set a really good, I think, foundation for your background and where we got to today. And considering a lot of people here, once again, are kind of looking to get into tech, and as somebody who mentors bootcamp graduates, CS majors, and PhD students, what is a commonality that you see across their job searches, and what is something people can take to their own that hopefully will make them feel a little bit more confident about, this isn't a world that is so disconnected from me, I can do this?
The commonality between people who are just starting out, and regardless of where they come from, boot camps or PhD programs, is what's known as an imposter syndrome, right? And you're going to be found out, that people are just gonna ask you a question. You're not going to know the answer, and they're going to laugh at you, and that's it, right? So that's now, as we all know about the pretender syndrome, it's it's not that you don't know a specific thing. It's what you know does not exactly overlap. So we all think that what we know is just it's a small circle, and what everybody else knows, it's a much larger circle around our circle. So everything that we know is just a cornball thing. We'll bring it up and everybody's like, oh yeah, that's just obvious. But that's not how it is. If you look at your knowledge bubble is very similar to other people's knowledge bubble, but it's just a Venn diagram. So the overlaps that you have with other people, they're not as profound. So basically that's how you can think of it, which is your knowledge is unique, and what you know others don't. Some of it they do, but some of it they don't. And just that pressure that we put on ourselves, again, regardless of what school you're coming from and what program have you finished, there's something that you feel you don't know and you don't measure up. And again, you're going to be found out, and people are just going to, whatever's your worst nightmare is gonna come, it's gonna come through, right? It's like everybody's worst, fear, public speaking, and kind of being naked in front of everybody and just being found out that you just don't know whatever it is that you're supposed to know, right? But come to realize, there's a possibility of all the things that can happen, and there's a possibility of things that that are likely to happen. And there's a very small, small circle of things that actually will happen. And we just think of it as, we're drawn to a negative side of it, as opposed to just, hey, how qualified do I need to be in order to be in this job? And as it turns out, your qualification is really your desire to try, right? That's 90% of your qualification. And if you don't have that, it's irrespective of all your other knowledge, right? So you just can't teach anybody to care, right? If you care, that's 90% of what you need, right? And you're willing to work hard. And at some point, somebody told themselves, well, you might be smarter than I am. You might have a better degree. You might have more experience, but you won't outwork me, right? So that won't happen. If you have that attitude that you won't outwork me, then and you learn few other habits, then you are well positioned, right? You are well positioned to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve, because that's what really counts.
Yeah, and I think we, saw that this last weekend with Tom Brady winning Super Bowl #7, when there wasn't a single person in the world who would argue that he's the most talented person on the field. But there's no question about it. He works harder than everybody else. And I think it's good to know that from a imposter syndrome standpoint, if somebody does find you out, they aren't going to shame you publicly like Cersei in Game of Thrones. It is much safer. And, it's typically, at least the way I've like to approach it, is as long as you aren't lying and blatantly misleading somebody, then you're going to be, fine. So, kind of shifting, gears here a little bit. And I know we hadn't brought this up, but you recently participated in an article kind of analyzing data, around suicide prevention and incorporating natural language processing. And you had mentioned that social media could be a huge factor for that. Do you see social media as a factor for imposter syndrome as well?
It absolutely is, because it presents you could think of everything that's happening. It's just happening. It just is what it is, right? But then you have, on top of it, you have a magnifying glass, right? And it just focuses on certain things, right? It does not really distort reality. It just basically presents a smaller picture on top of that reality. And you basically get you get myopic view of things, and if you tend to focus on that myopic view, then it's very easy to assume that this is what's happening and nothing else is, right? So this is how people, again, this does not change reality. Reality is what it is, and it just doesn't change. But the magnifying glass is being moved all around, and what the focus has been, like whatever is being magnified is what everybody is drawn to. So it's very easy. It's a very easy thing to focus on negativity and just kind of stay there and be there, right? And then your perception of what is occurring is really going to be under that magnifying glass as opposed to everything else, right? So keeping a broader perspective is really critical.
Yeah, and I think it's also important, to realize that mistakes are normal, and that, of course, very rarely are people willing to admit their own faults. Interviewing isn't about, so here's my list of cons and reasons you shouldn't hire me and mistakes I've made in the past. It's more of, look at all the shiny objects and great work I've done. And that's why you ask the questions in the interview about what is your weakness, or tell me about a time that you've struggled or failed, or how would you overcome this challenge. And so for anybody, listening that's been, wondering, okay, when's Q&A time coming? We're almost there. Feel free to have your questions ready. We'll, of course, be able to use the little chat feature. We can raise hands, or you can type it into the chat if you feel more comfortable going down that route. So Sergey, one of the things, I'd mentioned earlier was the great lockdown and the survey or kind of analysis that Microsoft had done and utilized a lot of data through LinkedIn. And one of the things that at least, kind of gives me, excitement for what we do, here at LearningFuze and helping people make these career changes is the growth that Microsoft forecasts for the tech field, where they're projecting over 149 million new tech jobs around the world, with 98 million of those being in software development. So while we hear about AI, while we hear about data science and machine learning, and there's the SolarWinds cybersecurity breach, why is it that software development is so in demand? Is it the fact that it's a catch-all kind of title, or is there something about building applications and software that maybe we're missing?
Because exactly of what we said, the computers will always be better. Will always be better at writing code, right? So eventually, though, not right now, but eventually computers will be better at writing code. But software development is very little about software development. Is about writing code. It's about making software, and making software is a human endeavor. And from a human endeavor point of view, it's fraught with uncertainty. That's one. Number two, it's fraught with contradiction. It also brings together people from various disciplines. If it was so easy to make it formulaic, then software development or software developers would not be in demand, right? And it would be easy to define, because we would define all the verticals where software needs to be written, and you would just write 90% of the functionality that needs to be written, and anybody could put it together. But that's not the case, because software development is not about computers. Software development is about people, and the people function is the most difficult function to replace.
I believe that's why, hiring managers value soft skills as much, if not more, than hard skills. And, I think we've all made the mistake of hiring somebody who was the smartest person technically, and you either realize or they realize that it's not worth the headaches of continuing to work together and everything. So final, thing before I'd love to open it up and see if anybody did have questions, from the audience is we've talked about, of course, the fact that we are building things for people. So keeping, of course, them in mind. And that is something I think a lot of especially career changers can bring to the table and bring to an application and an interview process, is the fact that they have maybe that experience that a computer science graduate may not. We've talked about the other huge component, that you had mentioned, which is caring and having the passion to outwork somebody in this type of field, which is exciting because it's changing every single day. Is there anything else, you'd like to impart on these future engineers and designers and developers that heck, could bring them back to us, and they're helping us make billions of dollars down the line?
So I basically, I'll answer your question not directly, but really I'm just going to tell you how I hire. Other people hire they use different criteria, and again, big companies and small companies, they use different. They're hired differently, but I typically hire, and I try to bucketize my assessment. So when I'm talking to somebody, I'm just trying to determine if they can do the job, right? So if you cannot do that job, then anything else is just really irrelevant, right? Because I need you to do X and you cannot do X, and that's unfortunately becomes a thing, right? But to me, it's a threshold of viability. The only thing you need to do is cross it, right? So that is somewhat of an uncommon view. People feel, well, if I get this developer, it's a better developer. If I get that developer, it's a better developer than that developer. That's not how I think of it. So if you cross that threshold, that you're good enough, right? So now again, the criteria that goes into it might be diverse, but I'm trying to make sure that somebody crosses that threshold. So my evaluation is not, it's not when you're comparing one person to another, people usually look at it apples versus chairs. It's not apples versus oranges even, it's apples versus chairs. And I just can't compare the two. So what I try to do is make sure that everybody that I interview either does or does not cross. And then as soon as they do, the skill is to the side. Right? The second bucket where I'm trying to evaluate whether people are a fit or not is culture. Every company has a particular culture. And again, when you ask people about culture, they will give you a very interesting answers. And usually those answers, they will come down to the following. We want people to be respectful, take showers, and make sure that make sure you don't curse out your coworkers, right? But that does not make, and we have a foosball table, right? So, but that does not make for a culture, right? So that's what I would expect from any person on the street. I would expect that when I'm passing by, you're not gonna punch me in the face. That's just common courtesy. Now that does not make for a culture of the company, and especially that does not make for a unique culture of the company. So I try to define the culture of the company as how do we resolve conflict, right? You think one thing and I think another. And how exactly do we resolve conflict? Conflict resolution is 90% of what culture is. So it's not values. I don't care about values. I care about values. I have kids, but I care about actions. I care about what people do, not what they think. So that's two. So it needs to be a fit. You either resolve conflict in a similar way that we do, or you can align in resolving the conflict how we do it. And if you can't, that's not a fit. And bucket number 3 is called force multiplication. I'm sure all of you know people who are individually super productive. They're just better than anybody else. But if you put them in a group of people, not only they don't make them productive, they make them unproductive. I'm sure you've seen it before. You put somebody in a group of people, and in 5 minutes from now, everybody's fighting, right? Nobody can agree on anything. That is negative force multiplication. So to me, I'm looking at every position. I am looking at your individual productivity and your ability to work with others and make them more productive. So those are the criteria that I look at hiring, right? So basically, and I separate them intentionally so they don't, when they're in a single bucket, it's impossible to compare, right? Because the culture does not compare to skills. I just can't compare the two, right? The force multiplication does not compare to culture. I can't compare. So I compare people in separate buckets, right? Cross the threshold, congruent culture is the force multiplier, right? So, and that usually cuts down the number of people, really, really few candidates. And you could actually see that your skills are really, I'm not measuring, how far your skills extend. You only need to do is cross that threshold, right? So, you only need to be 6 feet tall. Once that, being 20 feet tall doesn't really matter, right? It's just what matters is you cross that threshold. So that's kind of how is that universal? The answer is no. But if you talk to people, I think you fundamentally come down to those three factors.
Well, and I think where you're, if you really dilute it, it is this person going to cause issues within my team that I'm going to regret later on, which, as we know, the cost of a bad hire is so much more exponential than the cost of a good hire. And that is typically why, a lot of companies, hire slow, some fire fast, some, continue to give people, I guess kind of second chances and stuff, but very rarely do you have successful businesses with good working cultures that operate by the hire fast, mentality. And it's tough because, as with tech, everything is about growth and achieving that before anybody else gets there. And so you can build, that moat that a lot of startups are looking for. So this is great because it transitions well into a question that was sent in by Frank, which is in regarding, the current situation of current remote work, but are companies looking for, people who would be local when possible, or are they going to just stay wide open to anybody across the country?
Okay. So if I take out my crystal ball, I'm just going to say that that 9 to 5 in the office is dead. Based on the statistics that everybody sees, it's that 60. We're likely to be in 3-2 or 2-3 working week, 2 days or 3 days in the office. Is it going to be acceptable to be 100% remote? I would say for 60% of the companies, it will. And for 40% companies, it won't. So you basically look at that. And how many companies are going to be requiring for you to be 5 days a week in the office? Well, very, very few. I don't think it's any, right? So in other words, 60, 40, and then those 40 are going to be 2-3 or 3-2.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of very similar statistics, and from hearing from alumni about kind of the conversations that they're having, with employers, the question has come up. I have heard a very small handful that have said that the employer did say, we are going to need you to be in the office. And my guess, and I hate to, just make any, kind of point any fingers, is that employer or team didn't really have a great process in place before COVID. They likely fell into that category of micromanagement, maybe have some, types of trust issues with past employees. And unfortunately, one of the tough parts too is that a lot of hiring decisions are made based off of past personnel and employee encounters. So you could be the person that is completely different than those other people that have come before. But as we all know, as humans, we make most of our decisions based off of past data. And so it's tough because a lot of the questions that come up in interviews, as wonky as they may be, could be from very, very specific situations that a manager or senior engineer has run into.
I forgot to, sorry, TJ, I forgot to say that some things I don't do during the interview. I don't ask you questions that you can look up on Google. Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. And as a matter of fact, because the junior engineer and very senior engineers, they're all lookup answers on Google. I don't need to ask you something you can look up. Now, so what do I ask? I usually ask one question. In as much detail, tell me how the internet works. Yeah, if I go to www.yahoo.com, what happens, right? Now, when you know a lot, so I have one question and lots of sub questions, right? Anything from hosting to DNS to load balancing to databases to data centers to cloud to any level that you're comfortable in discussing. And you yourself will pick, and you will stop at the point and where you no longer feel comfortable, right? So that's usually just a question, one question I ask. Like, you know, if I'm going to ask you what's the big O of quicksort, or I'm going to ask you what, you know, what's the difference between the vector and the array list, that serves no purpose, because again, you can look that up. But the question of how internet works is very difficult to look up. That's one. Number two, you can't look up an understanding, right? So I think that's something else to keep in mind. Again, people might be, there's unfortunately, and then everybody has to come to terms with the fact that a lot of people who are interviewing you, they don't know how to interview well, right? So I think one of the things that you should consider is the interview process. You absolutely, interview is a game of sorts, and it's a game that you can win. I became better at interviewing, and I won more games. And the reason I did is because I basically, what I try to do is, it's a game of psychology, right? Where a lot of psychology is involved. That's one. Number two, I try to make sure that I'm speaking at the interview more than the interviewer. If you find yourself where the ratio is the opposite, something is not going right. So one is you're not putting your best foot forward. That's one. Number two, you're not inquisitive enough, right? You're not asking them the questions, and you're also giving them the opportunity to ask you questions that you're not going to know the answers to. So just keep that in mind. It is a game, and it's a game you can win.
It's tough to get comfortable with that, but yes, as soon as you get to that, you know, mindset and realize that it isn't, you know, if it is a game, if it's not meant to be, once again, this is them trying to expose my imposter syndrome. Hopefully things become, you know, a little bit more comfortable. And of course, you know, once one question starts, the other questions start rolling in. So the next one is always an interesting one. And I'll just, you know, kind of keep it sweet. And we can kind of keep rolling through some of these. Is what is the difference between software engineering and web development?
Software engineering and web development. So again, web development is a subset of software engineering. Software engineering is really engineering software, mobile applications, and web applications, and progressive applications, and IoT. All of this is software engineering. But web engineering, web development and web engineering is basically mostly development for the web. And web applications, what we traditionally consider web applications. Obviously, software development is much, much broader. There's a lot of people who do software development purely in embedded software. They never deal with anything else but working in writing and assembly and in C, and they're writing the software for the chips, right?
And well, I'm going to take Luca's question and Chaim's and combine them. So for an entry-level hire, do you have a timeline for when you expect them to get ramped up? And then what can that hire do to ramp up and onboard as quickly as possible?
Okay, so that's a tricky question, and because there's no answer to it, because thinking about what does ramped up mean, right? For different companies, ramped up mean different things. You know, a product 100%, you're 100% productive as a senior developer. That is a question that just for every company is going to be different. What you need to focus on is what can I do on the day one that I can call an accomplishment, and on the day two that I can call an accomplishment, and how quickly I can write a piece of code, right? So that's not how, you know, it's not, am I fully productive or fully ramped up in 3 days? Am I fully productive and ramped up in 2 weeks? Because fully ramped up has a different meaning, but you should define your productivity on a daily basis, and it needs to be a plus day, right? So you need to net, that needs to be positive. So it's either writing a piece of code or writing a piece of content, or documenting something, or writing a unit test. And you should try to do that on day one, right? Maybe not on the critical path, but you should try to do that on day one. And slowly but surely, small accomplishments lead to big accomplishments.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. There's a lot of over, I guess, kind of expectations that we put on ourselves, and this idea that people have to get to XYZ point by a certain amount of time. And as a manager, it's more important that they're actually continuing to grow, and they also, I think, the value of that they know they're continuing to grow it is really important. So I mixed up. Oh, sorry, did you have something to add?
All right, but what I wanted to say is, for every organization, ramp up is going to be also different based on maturity of that organization. If nothing is documented, and it's been 20 years of writing code, I mean, it's going to be difficult for you to be fully ramped up, right? And if we have millions of lines of code written, and there's a gazillion and one use cases and user stories, it's just going to be difficult for you to do that, right? So I think trying to compartmentalize various things and just see how quickly you can ramp up with a particular thing. So you should, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's also a great opportunity for a question to ask the interviewer is, what are the expectations for this role, and what do the first 90 days look like? And getting an idea of that can, either one, give you an idea that they really don't have this thought out. They aren't ready for, bringing somebody on, and you're kind of both figuring it out as you go, or maybe they have a very set process in place, and hopefully that gives you a little bit more of a foundation and confidence.
Absolutely.
I had mixed up some names, so apologies, Haim. And it was John's question last time, but now we'll get to Haim's question, which this is always a fun one because, of course, job descriptions sometimes aren't even written by the hiring manager themselves. And almost always they include some type of professional or enterprise or insert adjective here, experience and number of years. So what should, bootcamp graduates, CS majors, PhD students, people who haven't had that opportunity yet be thinking in that situation?
Again, the job descriptions are written for the ideal candidate, and if you look at that, and it's going to be very difficult to measure up. I usually would apply for positions I feel that I'm 25% qualified for. So in other words, if I can cross that, if there's 10 skills and I only have 3, it's good enough. It absolutely is good enough. I always prided myself. One of the things you should keep in mind is that, there's all kinds of difficulty, and when you keep trying and you keep trying and keep trying, you will get better. So, for instance, I was deathly afraid of public speaking. I had a very thick accent. I would get extremely red, and people would notice that I get red, and I would get even redder. Right. So I would be so red that everybody would start to get afraid that I would pass out. Because I would try to speak very, very, very rapidly, and I would forget to breathe. Right. So I think over time, though, it's just the comfort level with the process, right? Public speaking, and then also being interviewed. And I interviewed insane amount, right? I would interview, and also, regardless if in the first 5 minutes, I didn't want that job. I wanted to get the interview to the offer stage. And it got to the point where I could get 9 jobs out of 10 that I applied. And that's what it's a game of numbers, right? It's your time at bet. If you get more time at bet, you are going to get better. And you should apply for things that you don't feel you're qualified for, because you never know. Plus, I met a lot of people through my interviewing process, and this cannot be a coincidence, the 2 companies that I interviewed with, and I turned down their job offer, the people who interviewed me later on in life became investors in my company, because they were so impressed and they wanted to hire me so much when I kept in touch. They basically, when I wanted to raise money, they became investors. So you should consider that as a networking opportunity, right? So you should interview a lot, right? That has to be like a going to, you know, imagine yourself having a job, and that job is to interview.
Yeah, and I think it's, important that interviewing isn't just the formal, you apply, you get set up with HR, all of this stuff. There are so many ways around that where even just having a conversation like this, heck, you open up a role 2 weeks later at a company and the person that you had talked to recently and impressed you with the questions that they had and the passion they have for development could be the first person that you pass along, or sometimes even just say, hey, you know what, we don't even need to interview this person. Let's get them on the team. And one of my favorite statistics is a study that actually looks at job descriptions and the chances of getting an interview, and it flattens off at about 45 to 50% of the qualifications that you meet as to your chances of getting an interview. Plus, I mean, who wants to go to a spot where you know everything already? Hopefully, you go in there and you're going to learn, a new
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah, you're going to stretch. Otherwise, what's the point, right?
Yeah. And so Easton was wondering, what do you think interviewers weight, or what extent do you think interviewers weight professional experience in non-software development teams?
They certainly consider it. They certainly consider it because, again, how you do anything is how you do everything. I tell that to my kids all the time, right? They're like, okay, when it matters, I'm gonna do better. But there's no such thing, right? It matters all the time. It's how you do anything, it's how you do everything. So your experience in leading whoever, meat packers, that will apply just the same. It's a different, same skills, different profession, right? Your experience in organizing people, setting deadlines, delivering on the deadline, responding to pressure is identical across all professions. It just is, right? How you do anything is how you do everything.
This timing is perfect. We've got one last question from Arlette, and should be able to wrap up by that 7 o'clock timeline for that we were all talking about beforehand. So Arlette's wondering, in recent hiring that you've been doing, what is your recruiting process? Do you utilize something like LinkedIn, direct applications through the website? Do you have any recommendations for approaches that people should take?
Okay, so the strategy that I employ is I ask for referrals, right? I will go to other CTOs and I will go to other founders and I say, do you know anybody, right? And a lot of times they just know a lot of people who they would refer. So now I just want the warm referral. So if I cannot find a warm referral, I will do a post. I will try to do everything that I possibly can to get it for free. Why? Well, it's not that I just don't want to pay money. I want to get the industrious applicant, right? I want to get the applicant that's is gonna look everywhere. They're gonna look at the sources and try to find it, right? I saw your LinkedIn, I saw your Twitter, I followed, I was looking. Right, it's not necessarily, and obviously it also depends on the level of the position and whatnot. But again, the referral is my most preferred way. The other is I will post it several times. I'll post it on my LinkedIn. I'll post it on Twitter. I'll post it on Facebook and just see if somebody will bite, right? Will apply. And if I can't do that, then I'll just use one of the platforms. I will use ZipRecruiter or Workable or something.
Yeah, I think it's, it often goes overlooked and understood how much hiring goes on without something, being posted. And the value, when people, think about who would you want to work with if you came into the office every day, one of your best friends or somebody you've never met, right off the street. Now, I think most of us would choose our best friend, but some of us may have best friends who we just love because, we've gone to school together, we grew up across the street, we wouldn't want to work with them. But typically people want to work with people that are similar to them. The easiest way to find that is already, and where you kind of already, operate and exist. And so this has been awesome, Sergey. I appreciate you taking the time. I'm so glad that I posted in the Operate Slack channel and asked anybody if they were interested in this. And it was funny too, because when I did that, I got so many of those little emoji responses on the bottom, and people like, yeah, great, this is awesome. And I'm like, yeah, but who's gonna actually, take the next step? So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, again, I don't want anybody to be thinking that's the parting words. I don't want anybody to be thinking they don't measure up somehow. I mean, I can tell you, if I was able to do it, then you can too. I came to this country when I was 20 without knowing the word of English. They could have named me a Mr. Banana, and I would be like, I'm a Mr. Banana now. That's just who I am. So if I was able to do it, you absolutely can, right? You can. And again, I spent so many. I was telling my wife, hey, I think I'm just stupid. I just can't figure it out. I just can't do it. And she's like, nope, no, you're not stupid. You need to give yourself time, and it's just that's what happens, right? And over time, you just get these small wins, and that builds up into a big confidence, right? And being confident is like one of those things. You don't need to. It's just it helps you, because if you feel confident that you can, no matter whatever happens, you will figure it out, right? And that's ultimately what you need to communicate during the interview. No matter what happens, I will figure it out, right? That I won't give up. I'll just figure it out.
Yeah. And I mean, gosh, there's so much wisdom that you've shared today. I can only imagine how smart your kids are. Maybe we'll have them on next time, and they'll be dropping some knowledge with us.
Yeah, they're already teaching me a lot, right? So it's they think that they're 50 now, right? So they know it better.
Yeah.
We did it all wrong, and now they know it better.
That's awesome. Well, Sergey, we'll let you get back to your family. Thanks again. Hope you have a great evening, and can't wait till we are able to circle back up at the Operate Studio again and talk to Kerry and such a great community that he's got built.
Thank you, guys. TJ, thank
Yeah.
you so much. And thank you guys so much for listening to me, and reach out if you want help. I'm here to help wherever I can.
Awesome. Thanks, Sergey. Have a great
All right.
evening, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Bye.